So tell me how you came to do all this, how you came to this business of dirty wars.
Well, I've been working as a journalist since the late 1990s, and primarily I was covering wars from the perspective of civilians who lived on the other side of American foreign policy and trying to tell their stories, and to do so in the U.S. where I thought it actually mattered. And so initially a lot of what I was doing was just telling the stories of ordinary people, and so I was in Iraq, I was in Yugoslavia, I was in Afghanistan, and I did a lot of reporting on the use of mercenaries like Blackwater and other companies. And when President Obama came into office in early 2009, it was pretty clear that he was going to be a hawkish president, even though he was the guy who told the world, oh, I'm going to radically change America's foreign policy, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize, which is sort of insane. And then I started looking at the role that his administration was playing in Afghanistan, because Obama had campaigned against John McCain for president by trying to make himself tougher on terrorism than John McCain, and by linking John McCain to the failed Iraq War, and saying, I'm going to put more troops in Afghanistan, we're going to go after Al-Qaeda, we're going to destroy the organization. So I went to Afghanistan early on in Obama's time in office and discovered that there was this growing secret war within the bigger war in Afghanistan. There are two wars. We see the conventional troops, the Marines and NATO, and then there's this other war which is about special operations forces. So I started to go into this world of covert ops and special operations and the CIA, and started this investigation that became a global investigation.
So the creation of uncontrolled parallel structures under the Bush-Rumsfeld government seems to be a center part of your book. Do these structures, like JSOC, you say
JSOC,
still dominate the clandestine war against terror?
Yeah, I mean, in the United States we have a permanent national security bureaucracy, or a permanent national security state, that doesn't really depend on who's president of the United States. So at times, like under Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld, there was a real expansion in that national security state, and under President Obama it has continued to expand, and he really has tried to put his stamp of legitimacy on it. So right now the U.S. on any given day has special operations forces in over 100 countries around the world. The CIA is, effectively a paramilitary organization. It's not that the CIA hasn't always had a paramilitary function, but it's grown in a huge way since September 11. Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld in particular spent their entire careers trying to create a dictatorship of the executive branch of the U.S. government when it comes to foreign policy. They don't want Congress or the courts to be involved at all with the planning of their little covert wars. And they achieved quite a coup after September 11th, because they were able to push through these really repressive laws. Some of them were domestic in the U.S., like the Patriot Act, and some of them, like this law called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, which was passed a few days after 9/11, gave the U.S. president permission to wage a war, a borderless war around the world. And that law remains on the books to this day. So Obama has used it, just as his predecessors did. So yeah, in short, I would say we have a national security state that doesn't depend on who is in office. It will constantly grow.
So you say it was a coup, Bush-Cheney, they used September 11th, or do you think?
Well, there's no doubt they used September 11th. I mean, I don't think they did September 11th. I mean, I don't believe in that theory at all. I think there is an organization called Al-Qaeda that planned this.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but they used 9/11,
yes,
and manipulated that horrible tragedy to justify all of these policies around the world. Only one member of the entire United States Congress in either house voted against the authorization to go to war on the world, and she was a progressive congresswoman, African American, named Barbara Lee from California. If you watch her speech, it's on YouTube, she was trembling when she gave that speech. She said, we are going to become the enemy that we claim to be fighting. We are going to be in a perpetual war. She was right about so many things. the Patriot Act was an incredibly repressive piece of legislation in the U.S. Only one senator, Russ Feingold, voted against it. What do you call the state using or manipulating tragedy to push through an agenda? In a way, it was a coup against democracy that to this day continues to impact the world.
Excuse me, just an intervention because it's actual. I read today in the newspaper about. He's called Jeh Johnson.
Jeh Johnson.
Jeh Johnson about drones to use it for the homeland security. What you heard about?
Well, so what happened is, when President Obama came into office, he brought on board, or brought onto his team in his administration, a number of lawyers who were very well respected in the human rights world. One of them, Harold Koh, was the former dean of the Yale University Law School and a major human rights lawyer. He went to the State Department and became the main lawyer signing off on the drone strikes and saying these are legitimate, these are legal. And then Jeh Johnson was a lawyer that they brought on at the Pentagon, at the Department of Defense, to do the same thing. So you had these two lawyers that were really putting a stamp of not just legality, but legitimacy because they had a human rights advocacy record. Jeh Johnson has now been nominated by President Obama to be the Director of Homeland Security. He was a major figure in the drone wars and now is going to be his nominee for Homeland Security.
I won't go into the detail about Eric Holder, for example. He's the Minister of Justice.
Eric Holder is, we call it the Attorney General in the U.S., but it's like the Minister of Justice.
Okay, because I read it today in the newspaper. It's close to the actual, because it's an intervention.
The focus of your last book was the privatization of war. What is the status of private military companies like Academy, Blackwater, MPRI, and others in actual...
Eine Frage. Geht es nachher alles auf eine Rechnung?
What's that?
Yeah.
What did you say?
Is it all in one?
I got it. It's on 235 is the room. 35.
35. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and other than actual U.S. cover operations?
Well, President Obama claimed that he was going to try to regulate the use of mercenaries and bring a system of accountability. Under his administration, the same mercenary companies that were working under Bush continued to thrive. In Afghanistan, you have mercenaries working for the Pentagon, working for the State Department, working for the CIA, working for other corporations. And much like the rest of Obama's wars, he's tried to say that he's somehow doing it different, that these companies are more regulated and are following the rules, but they continue to kill civilians. They continue to be at the heart of covert operations. Private contractors play a role in every single aspect of the U.S. national security state. They're at the NSA, at the CIA, at the FBI, at all of the intelligence agencies. We have a radically privatized national security state in the United States where big corporations are feeding off of the public's money and building up their own infrastructure. And I really think that's one of the main areas of U.S. foreign policy that's going to come back to hurt the United States at the end, because we're giving corporations incredible, unprecedented powers over state secrets, over military operations, over spying operations. These are for-profit companies at the end of the day. This isn't about patriotism or defending the homeland. This is about money.
It's about $600 a day for a mercenary.
Well, it depends on it depends on. There's the rates have plummeted a lot. The golden sort of age of the Iraq War was their heyday. You could get $1,200 a day to be a private contractor in the war zone. Now it's dropped down to, some of them, depending on their skill level, a couple $100 a day, all the way up to $700 or $800 a day. But
still working in Afghanistan too. Was Academy involved there?
Yeah, Academy. Blackwater has rebranded itself multiple times. It was Blackwater, then it was U.S. Training Center, then it was XE, then it was Academy. And the owner of the company, the founder of the company, Erik Prince, moved to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and the top 5 executives under him were indicted on conspiracy charges, but they ultimately just got like a slap on the wrist. You see, in the U.S., when you torture people in waterboarding or CIA operations, you get a book contract and you can go on tour. But when you blow the whistle on torture, you go to jail. So, if you actually reveal that torture happened. So, Obama said, look forward, not backwards. We're not going to prosecute anyone. That was the day this was all over. They send a message, it's okay to do this stuff.
After all your immense research and facts and figures, what is the most crucial thing you find out, or you did find out?
Well, I mean, that's difficult to say because it's, I mean, the book I wrote is hundreds and hundreds of pages, so I can't to focus on one thing. What I would say is that the message that's been sent from this previous 12 or 13 years of American foreign policy, the message that's been sent to the rest of the world is it doesn't really matter who the President of the United States is, that the U.S. is going to defend itself as an empire and is going to project to the world a set of rules where the United States has to follow one set of guidelines about international law and the rest of the world follows a different set of guidelines. To have a man who won the Nobel Peace Prize and who is a constitutional lawyer by training publicly asserting that the U.S. has the right to assassinate its own citizens and other nations' citizens without indicting them for any crime or without presenting the public with any information about them means that the U.S. doesn't actually recognize the system of nation states or sovereignty. And I think that between Bush and Obama, you know, it's very clear that America believes that it has a right to wage preemptive war. It's like pre-crime. You know, they're killing people whose identities they don't actually know on the belief that one day, you know, they may commit a crime or they may commit an act of terrorism. And for most of the world, that is against their values. And so, you know, I really feel like we're in a moment where the U.S. is asserting its right to be an empire. Not just its right, but that it's right to be an empire, which is a little bit more disturbing.
Isn't it also just the end of democracy as we thought?
You know, I mean, I'm very critical, obviously, of the government of my own nation. You know, I do think that there are incredible democratic systems within the United States. I think that democracy is under threat right now. I wouldn't say it's the end of democracy yet, but I think that if you don't have a truly independent press in a society that says it's a democracy or a democratic republic, as the U.S. is, you know, then you're moving into a really dangerous area. And I think on every level, civil liberties in the U.S., covert wars around the world, freedom of the press, all of these are under threat. And I do think that it's a threat to the democratic process. But I wouldn't say, I mean, I still believe that we can fight back. It's just Obama has really pacified a lot of the left in the United States. A lot of liberals in the United States have just kind of folded into his operation.
So here, with embedded journalism, the reporting on war is controlled and biased. Reading the footnotes of your book, you're widely using the publication of WikiLeaks materials.
Yes.
Is this an essential part of your research?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to quantify how important WikiLeaks has been, and more recently, the documents that Edward Snowden brought to the attention of the world. What WikiLeaks did was to challenge the secrecy, the over-secrecy of the United States, to unmask details about the relationship the U.S. has with human rights abusing countries as well as its own allies. It's not that we didn't understand these things were happening. It's that WikiLeaks revealed details that were incredible and were essential for all of us to understand. I mean, there were whole stories that I did in my book about Somali warlords, for instance, that wouldn't have been possible without WikiLeaks, because I found the names of these warlords being supported by the CIA in the WikiLeaks cables. I mean, I believe that we need more whistleblowers. We need more people like Chelsea Manning and more people like Edward Snowden. And there's another whistleblower, Thomas Drake, in the U.S. All of these are people who took huge risks for very principled reasons. And I think they did it because they were concerned about the systems that they were a part of. They were concerned about being a part of systematic human rights abuses or violations of our own laws in the U.S. So, I mean, WikiLeaks has been utterly essential to my work and even to the work of journalists who now smear WikiLeaks. You know, the New York Times has been on a smear campaign against WikiLeaks, and yet they benefited tremendously from what Julian Assange did and what Chelsea Manning did. The New York Times did not cover the trial of then Bradley Manning until they were shamed into doing it. It was a huge trial, one of the most important trials in modern American history, and large corporate media outlets that benefited from WikiLeaks didn't bother to show up for most of the trial. You know, they'll cover every, you know, if there was a case in the U.S. of this woman named Jodi Arias, who's like this, you know, she was portrayed as like this sexy young Mormon woman who murdered her boyfriend. They would send like 50 correspondents, you know, from television networks to cover this trial, and none of them show up for the trial of Bradley Manning. that says a lot about the values of, in the U.S. with our media culture.
Shouldn't we, as citizens, also try to protect whistleblowers?
Yeah, I mean, Obama actually said when he was running for president that he was going to, make sure that whistleblowers had protection. He and his administration have prosecuted more whistleblowers than all of the previous administrations combined in U.S. history under this law called the Espionage Act, which was passed in 1917 to go after people committing acts of espionage for Germany. It's now being used today to go after people who provide independent information to journalists. And there's a former CIA officer named John Kiriakou who is in prison right now for revealing classified information. And part of what he did was to blow the whistle on torture and waterboarding. As I said before, if you order waterboarding or participate in it, you get a book contract, like this guy Jose Rodriguez, who ran the CIA torture program. If you talk publicly about it as a former CIA person, you go to jail. So it's shocking,
That brings me to another thing. Is there a specific role of German support in the covert programs of identifying, interrogation and transport of prisoners to secret camps? For example, what is the logistic importance of Ramstein Air Base and the AFRICOM structures in Stuttgart?
Well, I mean, the question of rendition, I know there's been investigations in Germany about this, and I don't know the findings of it. What I will say is that German soil is used by the U.S. military and by special operations forces for a wide range of activities across the globe. Stuttgart is one of the main hubs where the U.S. runs what is effectively an assassination program in Africa. And AFRICOM is based at Stuttgart and at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. So they have ongoing lethal operations that are being planned from German soil at Stuttgart. The head of the Special Operations Command for Europe is generally based in Stuttgart. The Joint Special Operations Command, this elite secretive commando unit, plans operations out of Stuttgart. So, Germany is playing a very serious role in the targeted killing campaign in Africa. Also, there's a case of a German citizen who was killed in a drone strike in Waziristan in Pakistan in late 2010. He's a man of Turkish descent, but he's a German citizen. He was killed in a drone strike by the United States. There's very serious questions that the German government should have to answer about whether it had anything to do with providing intelligence to the Americans that led to the killing or assassination of this German citizen by the United States. Because if Germany, my understanding from talking to some of his lawyers, his family's lawyers, is that if Germany did participate in this and provided intelligence to the Americans that helped to kill one of their own citizens, that it's potentially illegal in Germany. So that's part of where the scandal is. But there's an open court case on this in Germany, and we'll see what happens. But the German state has cooperated with the CIA, with the NSA, certainly with the U.S. military. So its hands are not clean in these operations. The specifics of it, that's up to German journalists to figure out.
So the war against terror does not accept the status of POW. With the term of illegal enemy combatant, the Geneva Convention and international law is disabled.
Well, what happened after September 11th, Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld embraced the idea that the United States did not need to abide by laws that Al-Qaeda would not abide by, which is a really dangerous assertion for a global superpower and a democratic society to make. And what happened is that they reverse engineered a training program that was used to prepare American soldiers to endure torture from lawless enemies. They used it, reverse engineered it, and then were interrogating prisoners using tactics that were supposed to be used to train U.S. soldiers to resist torture. There were blatant violations of the Geneva Conventions. The entire creation of Guantanamo is a massive violation of the Geneva Conventions. So, the fact that Guantanamo remains open, that under President Obama they are force-feeding prisoners, that there are people that are being held there who have been cleared for release, is an abomination. it's one of the most clear pieces of evidence that we have on the double standard that the U.S. believes applies to its operations. If Russia or China were operating, this kind of a prison offshore, and they were, snatching people from around the world and taking them there, I mean, the United States would be going insane about this. But it's us, and there's somehow a way to defend it, and it's indefensible.
So what can we do as citizens?
I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, I think we're living in an exciting moment in a way. I mean, what's happened with Edward Snowden, what happened with WikiLeaks, what's happening with sort of cyber warfare and hackers and cypherpunks and all of this stuff. There's sort of new era. There's a lot of risk of all of our information being up in the cloud. I'm talking to you right now in front of the Interior Ministry of of Germany, and we live in surveillance states where our data is being tracked, our metadata is being sucked up by powerful nations around the world. But we're also living in a world where a lot of young people are engaged in cyber activism. I mean, I ultimately believe that it's up to the average German to make it their business every week to be about confronting the state in their own country for violations of human rights, for their involvement in foreign wars, and wars of aggression or preemptive wars, as it is in the United States. But it's an uphill battle. Cynicism is very high. Apathy is very high. The global economy is in trouble. People are struggling to support their families. When you're struggling to keep your family alive, it's very hard to be a part of a social justice struggle. But I think ultimately it is up to all of us to make it a part of our daily lives, to be about change and about confronting the state.
So we have learned that you are doing something, you're planning together with Glenn Greenwald and others, a new media project. What is the difference to existing common media?
Well, Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. Laura Poitras is a filmmaker who lives here in Berlin, and she's an Academy Award nominated filmmaker who's making a film on whistleblowers right now. The three of us have been talking for some time about starting some kind of a website or media project together. The initial idea of it was that it was going to be a kind of rapid response journalism, investigative journalism, a place to put documents online if we didn't find more traditional places to place the stories. And as we were beginning to plan this website, we were contacted by Pierre Omidyar, who was the founder of eBay. And he, it turns out, was thinking about starting his own news organization, and was asking Glenn, at first asking Glenn Greenwald if Glenn wanted to contribute by just writing some articles or something. He wasn't trying to hire anyone, or he didn't know about our project. And we started discussing with him what we were doing, and we decided to merge the projects together and work with him on it. So the news got leaked that we were doing this, which is ironic because we all work in the world of leaks, and then our own project got leaked. So we weren't ready yet to put it out into the world, but it got out actually while I was here in Germany. So we're hoping to launch in the next few months, and we're going to bring on some young journalists who are hungry, that want to go and get the stories, and we're going to work with some really experienced journalists. So we're not trying to knock other media outlets out of business. We want to build alliances with people, but we want to create a horizontal structure where no one is really the boss, and that the journalists are driving the coverage based on working sources and covering beats. And so I mean, I'm very excited about it. We weren't ready yet to fully discuss it.
So, do you feel hindered or handicapped in your journalist work by government officials and officials? Is your phone being tapped, your webpage being hacked, or are there restrictions of traveling?
Well, I mean, I'm not under any travel restrictions that I know of. I do know that I get detained a lot when I come back into the U.S. I get pulled aside for questioning in the secondary area of the airport. My computer has been hacked. I assume that all journalists doing this kind of reporting, where they're talking to confidential sources within the military or intelligence community, are at a minimum having their metadata tracked so that those in power can figure out who your sources are. I mean, it's changed the way we do our work. If you're not using encryption, or doing something to protect your sources, it's pretty irresponsible. So, all of us, I think, feel some pressure. When you combine the surveillance state with the prosecution of whistleblowers, with the monitoring of journalist communications, it's a war on journalism. And in some countries, like Mexico, that war it means journalists are murdered every week. In the U.S., it's more nuanced. sort of the hidden hand of the state behind everything, but they're very clever. They don't call journalists up and say you're going to have an accident. You know, it's not like in the movies. It's more that they're more interested in going after our sources than they are in going after journalists. But by going after sources of independent information, you're undermining the democratic nature of a free press.
Do you have a specific message for the German public?
Well, I mean, it goes into something that I was saying before, which is that, you know, first of all, I think that Germany should be investigating the role that its territory is being used for in American wars and American spy operations. And, you know, the fact that Stuttgart is hosting the kinds of forces it is. It's not just about hosting U.S. military forces, although that's an issue too. It's that it's being used to wage a preemptive war that has as its central tactic what amount to assassination operations or targeted capture operations. So that should be investigated. But also, if there's one thing that's become clear from the NSA scandal and the Edward Snowden leaks, it's that most powerful nations around the world, if not all of them, are engaged in these kinds of surveillance operations. The German citizens should demand answers from their own government about the extent to which they're spying, that Germany is spying on its own citizens, the extent to which it's aiding and abetting the U.S. spy program around the world. You know, the actions of the NATO alliance over these years, in some ways, are utterly scandalous. NATO at times is used as a replacement for United Nations authorization to use military force, as was the case in the Kosovo War in 1999. A totally illegal 78-day bombing campaign that Germany was centrally involved with. You know, so I mean, I think NATO and its role in the world should be of great concern to every German citizen. We're going to pay a price for these policies at some point. It may not be in a year or 5 years, but we are going to pay a price, just like America paid a price for its policies. You know, 9/11 was blowback. You know, Al-Qaeda didn't come out of a vacuum. You know, there are things we're setting into motion now that we'll pay for later. You know, look who we backed in Libya. Look who we're backing in Syria. What are they going to be doing 10 years from now? So I think this has to do with our own security also. You know, I think we're going to see a rise in acts of terrorism in Western countries because of this. So, you know, my message for Germans is to demand accountability from your own state and force these officials, particularly when they want to use organized violence around the world, to explain why that's in Germany's actual interests.
I'm also thinking of the German history. You know, Germans in general, I think 70% or something like that, are against any kind of foreign intervention.
Are more or less pacifists, or
very much.
Yeah.
You know, like Germans have turned into pacifists. So, is there something the Germans could do especially?
Well, I mean, I'm always very heartened when I read about public opinion in Germany regarding these wars, because, I mean, I think that should be the default position of most people in the world, that you don't believe that your state should be involved with offensive wars. It's one thing if you're actually facing a threat. There's a foreign invader, you know, that's coming in, and they're trying to, you know, burn people's homes down and steal your property. You know, I mean, of course, nations have a right to defend themselves, but
you don't have to forget about that. We are the second or third on weapon exportation in the world.
Yeah.
Here in Germany.
Yeah.
Du musst deine Fragen lauter stellen, sonst versteht man nicht.
No, it was just a short intervention about that, and then we should talk about what's German sovereignty.
Yeah.
There is no sovereignty in itself. That we have. This is the first question we have to ask ourselves here in Germany. But NATO, what's that?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, and Merkel's government is, you know, the values on a foreign policy level of the Merkel government are very consistent with the Obama administration's. I mean, it's, I mean, NATO. I mean, I remember, you know, in the 90s there was this whole discussion about, you know, is NATO even a relevant organization anymore? You know, and then they had their little war, their Kosovo war, and all of a sudden it's like NATO is this, like, you know, prized institution of international legitimacy, when, I mean, the whole thing had to do with confronting the Soviet sphere of influence. The founding of NATO had everything to do with confronting other nations' spheres of influence. And now it's being used to enforce the will of a small number of nations that happen to be powerful Western democracies, to impose their will on other nations around the world. It's become a force of conquest rather than defense. The idea of it was supposed to be in self-defense, and I mean, of course, that whole history is full of bullshit justifications. But what has NATO been doing that is actual self-defense lately? I mean, was Libya self-defense? I mean, it's.
Yeah, the argument is basically we gotta protect the oil or gas.
Well, that's an empire argument. Obama's speech at the UN General Assembly, he said we'll use our military to secure energy resources. That's imperialism. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, well, but this is a kind of industrialization and privatization of war.
Yeah.
Because you wrote about this Anwar al-Awlaki, this family, and what happened there. And producing new terrorists.
Yeah.
This is a kind of perpetuum mobile, we call it in German. This is in itself working again and again.
Yeah.
There is no sense of peace in it. Just contradiction. Provoke more aggression, more and more and more.
We call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're creating the very threat we claim to be fighting with our policies. So when a state asserts the right to kill one of its own citizens, and this person's not been charged with a crime, there hasn't been an effort to capture him, and the president serves as the prosecutor, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. That's like the actions of emperors or kings. It's like a monarchist perspective on the world, where you issue an edict and say this citizen dies. The Alice in Wonderland, the book. The Queen. What does the Queen say? Verdict first, trial later. So if we do that to our own citizens, what do you expect our view is on other citizens around the world?
Well, one more here. There's one chapter in your book which describes Camp Nama, as one of the most important centers of illegal interrogation and torture prisons.
Yeah. So Camp Nama, which stood for Nasty Ass Military Area, was a secret prison in Iraq that was run by the Joint Special Operations Command, this secretive commando unit. And there was systematic torture of Iraqi prisoners there. The Red Cross was not allowed in. The regular U.S. military was not allowed in. And it was one of the laboratories where the sort of new face of war on terror was created. The same kinds of tactics that we saw at Abu Ghraib were used in scores of facilities, and we never knew anything about them and never heard anything about them. So, under Obama claims that he ended torture. He claims that he shut down the secret prisons, and a lot of it is just cosmetic change. They're going back to the Clinton era policy or practice of sending people to other nations to get tortured instead of the CIA doing the actual torturing. At the end of the day, it amounts to the same policy. It's just that Obama can say we're not torturing. If someone else is doing it, it's okay, but we don't torture. It's like purchasing someone to do your dirty work for you, which is mercenaryism at the end of the day also. Whether you're using a client state or a private contractor, they're acting as a proxy for you.
The ICRC wasn't allowed for them, the International Committee of Red Cross.
They weren't allowed in Camp Nama, but also now, under Obama, there is. I discovered a prison in the basement of Somalia's National Security Service, which is a secret prison that is being used by the United States to interrogate people from Al-Shabaab or other organizations in East Africa. And when I spoke to the Red Cross about it, they said that they hadn't even heard of the facility. So clearly this is still happening.
Excuse me, Red Cross? You mean
ICRC.
Delegates from Geneva?
Yes. They're not allowed access to it. The U.S. also at times under Obama has held prisoners on ships in the Indian Ocean or elsewhere. This guy that they kidnapped in Tripoli a few weeks ago, they took him to a ship first and they were interrogating him there, and then they moved him to the United States. But this is a common practice under Obama.
So I have one more question.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to wrap up soon too.
Yeah.
But we can. No, it's okay.
When I see how the wars are started in general, it's all basically through media lies. I haven't found in the last 100 years a war that hasn't been started on a lie. Do you think that is kind of structural? Or is it just the way it happens.
I mean, war is inherently one big lie. The idea that by use of force you can bring peace. I mean, it was the heart of Orwell's. The whole point of Orwell's 1984 was that the state was eating its own people, and all the while telling them that it was good for them. And you know, we have very sophisticated big brothers in the world now. You know, but at the end of the day, it's that same mentality. You know, the war to end all wars, you know, predates all of our lifetime. And how many wars are there being waged in the world right now? The only beneficiaries of any of these wars have been the elite, the rich, and in the current context, huge corporations. They're the only people that have won anything from these wars. You know, I mean, people talk about, oh, there might be a coup in the United States. I mean, there are a lot of people on the hard left who talk about, oh, there's going to be a coup and the military is going to take over. They don't need to take over. There already was a coup. Following World War II, the creation of the military-industrial complex that grew out of in the United States and spread across the globe was effectively a coup, where corporations didn't need to impose their will on others through the use of force. They were able to manipulate the state into doing it. And it's reached a point where you don't need a conspiracy between the state and big corporations anymore. They just naturally act together. They're like an organism now. And so, you know, how do you confront that? I mean, that, to me, that's the debate we should be having, is not just about the role the state plays in our lives, but these corporations. Incredibly powerful, the only victors of any of this stuff.
Yeah, so how do we confront that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm saying I would like that conversation. I mean, I ended my book on questions, and, you know, the film that we did was on questions, so that's the debate and discussion I think should be global, you know. I mean, in America, we're a nation of sleeping people right now about this stuff. You need to wake up and realize, if you don't do something about it when it's under attack, once these laws are passed, it's almost impossible to go back, you know, so that's the discussion I want to be having.
Aren't you already, you know, by opening up a new news media, doing something very essential?
Well, we're trying. I mean, I think that, look, I mean, one of the most important things that can happen in our societies is to build truly independent media institutions, or to support ones that are under attack or might go bankrupt, because, you know, I mean, that is an essential part of movements for social justice, is to have effective, credible media that speaks to the population and, you know, about the way things actually are. I mean, that's a huge part of it, but I don't want to become journalist-centric, because at the end of the day, you know, action from people is what changes things. Democratic media can play a role in that, but, you know, it's action at the end of the day that will change things. So.
Yeah, but people have to be enlightened. They have to know.
No, of course, no, that's what I'm saying. I mean, we need those institutions, but we also need people to get off their couch and go do something, you know. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Good to talk to you guys. Yeah. No, my pleasure. Yeah. It's good to meet both of you guys. Yeah.